webinar on impact investing for foundations together with CRITIM. And for some of you who've been to the other two, this is a great way to continue adding to your knowledge. But for those who are, it's your first webinar you've come to, they are designed in a way where you don't need to have the knowledge for the previous two. So this one, we're focusing on measuring your impact, and it's an introduction to drafting a theory of change. And we have got we've got a CRITIM team who have got a couple of speakers who are going to speak quite practically about how to do this. So I'm going to hand over now to Nicole Martin to just let you know how this webinar is going to run and introduce you to our speakers. Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Louise. Let me just quickly pop up a slide. I promise mine won't be very long, but just as a welcome to everyone and a thank you again to IPASA for facilitating these webinars. For us as the sort of authors of the handbook, it's fantastic to see people engaging with the content. So it's great to see so many people on this call and in the previous webinars as well. As Louise mentioned, this is part of a series, and the content is based on the content of the handbook for foundations on impact investing, which was really developed to help foundations at any point in their journey trying to explore impact investing strategies and take their sort of learning further. We thank everyone who was involved in it. So a big thanks already to IPASA, to Impact Investing South Africa for helping us, and then of course to the funders of the research, which was SAB Foundation, Tutua, and First Rand Empowerment Foundation. So we're very grateful for that. Today, as was been mentioned, is the final webinar in this series. So we have done previously an introduction to impact investing. So that was really starting with the basic foundations of the discussion. And then we spoke a bit about drafting your strategy, so understanding different approaches to impact investing for foundations. And today is really exciting for anyone who's sort of nerds out about the impact side, which I imagine quite a few people on the call, it's what you do and live and breathe every day. But we're talking today a little bit about measuring impact. And it's really exciting because obviously when we talk about impact investing, a big part of that is you can't be an impact investor if you aren't measuring, tracking, monitoring your impact. So we're very excited about that. And just as a reminder that we also are hosting a masterclass where we unpack the handbook in more detail, and that is happening as a side event to the IPASA Symposium in October. And I think we'll share a little bit more information about that at a later stage. But if you are interested in that, please do get in touch with IPASA about joining us. It's really about getting really practical and unpacking the theory through practical exercises so that you can go back to your desk after the symposium and get cracking on this. So today, we're really fortunate to be joined by a great selection of speakers. We've got Jerusha Governor and Cara Hartley from PDG, who are both directors there, to lay the foundation for us, to give us the foundational basic principles around impact measurement and monitoring, and drafting your theory of change. And then, as always, we have got funders in the room to talk through their experience about putting this the principles into practice. So we've got Beatrice Watermeer joining us from Anglo-American Foundation, talking about their approach to IMM. And then we've got Lwazi, who's joining us from Makwande, who's going to talk to us, very exciting, about how they're looking at social return on investment. So the conversation should naturally evolve and become a little bit more in depth. As a reminder, you don't need to be taking notes. We are recording. We'll also have time at the end for questions. So we encourage you to jot them down. You can throw them into the chat, or you can save them for when we have the sort of Q&A and discussion and ask them live and in person. So with that said, my next job is very easy. It's just to hand over to Jerusha and Cara to get us started. And after that, we will hear from Beatrice, and then we will hear from Lwazi, and then we'll have our Q&A. So again, thank you very much to everyone for being here today. And we hope you're going to find this an interesting and valuable discussion. let me stop sharing and I'll hand over to Jerusha and Cara.
Got it. Okay. Let me share my screen. Okay. Confirming you can see my screen?
Yes, we can, Jerusha.
Okay, great. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for allowing Cara and I to join the space and share some of our expertise. I quite liked at the beginning, as we joined, Fia referred to us as the solid MND people. So we're going to own that and share a little bit of our knowledge as solid MND people. Both of us, as Nicole indicated, are directors at PDG, Farmer Development Consulting, and we are also both what we refer to as legacy board members of the South African M&E Association. So we are continuously contributing and learning ourselves in the M&E space, each bringing our own unique flavor to our areas that we are passionate about in M&E. So today we are speaking about measuring your impact, but we are particularly focusing on introducing theory of change. And the way we are structuring this session is firstly just to share briefly a little bit about PDG so that you get a sense of who we are and why we care about impact measurement. And then Cara is going to spend quite a bit of time talking through what IMM is, so that at the top I've got the acronyms there for you. IMM meaning impact measurement and management, as well as TOC, which is theory of change. And then she'll speak to some of the components and how that is associated with what you actually measure. And then beyond that, and all of this content is aligned with the guidelines. So I think the guidelines that Nicole mentioned, developed by Crutham, is a really useful guide. And so we have drawn from content there as well as our own knowledge and expertise. So we will add a bit more to speak to a little bit about how you enhance your theory of change. So as the evaluation, the measurement fields are growing and maturing, there are new ways of thinking about this as well. So just to tell you a bit about PDG. So PDG, we are a consultancy, a South African consultancy, but our work really spans largely embedded in South Africa, but expands across the continent as well. And all of the work we do as a consultancy based in Cape Town and Joburg is focused on helping organizations, including philanthropic organizations, foundations, and quite a significant focus on government is around supporting informed decisions. And why we care is that it's really about that public interest, that we care about ensuring that we are doing good for the public. And we know that we need to do this by supporting different entities that are either investing in or introducing interventions that are in social services, education, municipal services, and other areas that we have expertise in. So that's really why we care. And we have quite a broad range of expertise in this space. So in the blue boxes, really, those are our practice areas. And these are the areas of expertise that we support public services and public sector. And Cara is one of the co-directors of the monitoring and evaluation practice, and I'm the director and lead of the innovation practice. These are the two key practices where we have a particular intersection with IMM. The other practices are also quite critical within our organization, and they, to some extent, also support interventions that have a relation or are part of ensuring there's impact in public in South Africa and beyond. So this is who we are at brief. You can have a look at our website and also follow us on LinkedIn if you want to get a bit more sense of what we're about. We do have quite extensive expertise, and since 1990, I've joined more recently, but the organization itself holds quite a breadth of knowledge and expertise across various sectors. So this is who we are, but I'm going to hand over to Cara, who's going to speak a bit more about IMM and theory of change.
Thanks, Jerusha. Yes. Hello, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity. I'll start by just locating IMM. IMM is a function that should be both something you do upfront if you as a foundation are developing an impact strategy, and then becomes ongoing. You can see that in the diagram that I've posted here that is from the Impact Investing Handbook. That at step 4, once we've got our policy and strategy designed, or it's an advanced draft, we should be developing a theory of change that articulates that and the impact measurement and management strategy. And then as we start implementing in step 5, monitoring and evaluation, and in this environment, IMM becomes an ongoing function. Jerusha, I think since you're sharing, I'll have to ask you to move slides every now and again. So the measurement part is about understanding and communicating the impact of the entity or the investment on people in the natural environment. And then management is using that understanding and information to improve that impact. So that is a easy, quick working definition of IMM, and it's really important to do good IMM if you are in impact investing. The handbook highlights that it's actually sometimes a weakness of impact investing at the moment, and it's really critical to get it right if these investments are to make the best and biggest difference as intended. So moving on to the next slide. IMM itself, you could also see as a little circle, as the handbook has done. And I'm going to focus in the planning stage or phase, specifically on theories of change. And then on, I'll touch on how do you then take a good theory of change and plan your IMM, develop your IMM framework and select metrics that speak to that theory of change. But the Impact Investing Handbook has a bit more detail, and particularly in applying it to impact investing specifically. Moving on. So what's a theory of change? I know a couple of you guys, I've recognized you who attended here, and some of you are familiar with this. But if you are not, theory of change is the thing that's going to help that one professor to explain more clearly how it is that we get from the thing on the left of the board, the thing that we are, our work that we are doing, to what change we are trying to make in the world. That is what a theory of change does. And on the next slide, there's a definition. It is a clear, logical framework that outlines how an investment is expected to lead to the desired outcomes and impact. It sets out the critical assumptions underlying the intended impact and provides a framework for measuring progress towards specific objectives. So just to highlight those few words, logical. It's about explaining the logic. Why is it that if we do X, that Y is expected to follow, like to be caused by our work? And how is that going to cause the type of change we're seeking to achieve for people or the environment? Assumptions are a really critical part of what makes a good theory of change, the way that it makes them explicit, and then also allows everybody to interrogate the quality of those assumptions. And so I'll spend a bit of time later in my presentation on assumptions. And then once you've got a good theory of change, like I've mentioned, that becomes your foundation for designing and planning your measuring of progress against your objectives. On the next slide is a very quick, this very basic flowchart says an apple a day keeps the doctor away. You might have somebody who decides it's a good idea to deliver apples to schools. Free apples, all the schools that want them. Come every Monday, we're going to give you lots of apples because we are investing in health. Oh, really? Okay, how does that actually work? On the next slide is a proposed theory of change. You can see that it firstly adds more steps to explain what happens after we deliver the apples to schools. The other thing that it does quite usefully is it shows you that there are different ways in which delivering apples to schools could potentially improve the health of children in that school. Let's just take the pathway on the right. If children eat the apples instead of unhealthy things, junk food and snacks, it could contribute to decreasing body mass index. And that also reminds us that that pathway is only going to work if, in fact, the problem was concerns about obesity or prevalence of obesity and the impact that that has on health. If it was not that, then maybe apples are meant to work through a different channel to get to improved health. Is it a deficit in vitamin C? Is it something called quercetin? And if it's something called quercetin that we are concerned about, then it better be red apples, because it's the red apple skin that would have that health benefit. So a theory of change helps us to be more explicit about exactly what it is about our intervention that's going to have the desired outcome for people or the environment. And as you can see here also, so I've basically now talked about the arrows, the fact that the causal relationships are shown more explicitly in a theory of change. And the other thing that I've tried to demonstrate with these icons is Once you know exactly what those causal relationships and results are and the chain in which they're meant to happen, you can then measure them. First, you need to know what they are, and then you can start talking about, okay, how would we measure whether we've done this? So for Apple delivery, okay, that's step one. So we need to measure that. We need to know whether that's happening to the extent also that we intended. And I'll speak just now about good metrics and how do you choose them. And then what we need to measure in this case, if we were talking about the results chain on the right, then it would be important to have some indication of whether in fact BMIs are being affected by our intervention and ultimately whether that is having the effect on improved health. So there's three key components, if I have to be very quick, which I do in this presentation, that one needs to master and that are markers of a good theory of change, and all the more so if you're going to use it for IMM. The first is the results chain. So I've shown you an example just now. The results chain is things that, if we move to the next slide, is the inputs and activities and outputs that the investment is enabling or that the intervention is doing as implementation, and explaining how that leads to outcomes and impacts. Oh, something I've meant to say on an earlier slide was, if you come from the conventional M&E world, the traditional M&E world like me, in the development sector, NGOs, grants, public sector, we use the word impact specifically differently. And it's important if you are making that move from the one profession or practice into IMM, into the other, that you take careful note of that. So it is explained on the impact, I think the Impact Investment Initiative on their website. And I'll put a link in here as well, but just to take very careful note of how we use that term differently. But theories of change always have results chains. This is a simple linear one, and that's as much as we'll have time for today. So let me show you a couple of examples of a few simple linear ones. On the next slide is the EPWP one. Ooh, and I hope, Jerusha, if you can try to zoom in on the output in the middle that says income support. There we go, yes. Just to give you a sense of how this works, we say that if people get employment through the expanded public works program, then it will increase their income. Well, firstly, they must receive a wage, otherwise it's not going to work. Then that will increase the income to target groups, which will enable them, if you move to the right, to meet more of their basic needs in their households, which is already reducing poverty levels on the far right. But there's also another channel here that the hypothesis is that some households may also manage to increase their investment in poverty and vulnerability reducing strategies like assets or education. So that is just another example of a results chain explaining that causal logic. And on the next slide is one more. This is one that is also featured in the handbook, and it's for Innovation Edge. And I know the layout again is a bit, we can return to this one later. The one that we will return to later is the one on early health and well-being. And I will touch on it again when we get to the selection of impact metrics and explain to you, or just give you an example of how one would use this kind of a theory of change to then say, okay, what should we measure as impact investors or with our impact investment strategy? But for now, we can move on. So that's a results chain. The next thing that I'd like to highlight is assumptions. I think it is really valuable and worth investing in rigorously unpacking assumptions. This typology of assumptions that I'm showing has been proposed and has been very useful to us at PDG when we're working with clients to develop theories of change, to make sure that we don't only remember one type of assumption, but we actually broadly consider the range of assumptions underlying a theory of change. So just to highlight causal assumptions, they are the ones that explain why one box leads to another. It's almost the ones that sit on the arrows in your theory of change. How is it that this output that we have produced is meant to translate into the desired long-term outcomes? Why is it that we think if we do this, then the next thing will follow? And maybe this one will be more obvious, and participants or you yourselves may be ready to explain those assumptions. You may be in the habit of justifying them to potential supporters or stakeholders. You might say, research says that if we deliver apples to schools, then health will improve. Or you may say, we've seen across many contexts that when you provide apples to schools, you can expect improvements in health. The one that is the others are a bit less commonly considered, and that's where the rigor is really valuable of using a typology like this and surfacing assumptions at every level. Diagnostic assumptions talk about the root causes of the problem or opportunity. We're seeing a shift, and Jerusha's going to speak to it in a little while, where people are realizing that often a single intervention can only address a narrow number of the root causes, and that actually it's very valuable. It's almost it's becoming required, if we want to make real change in the world, to consider a broader range of root causes, and then to be clear about the diagnostic assumptions, if you will, for why we are doing this thing, why we think this thing is the right thing in light of what we believe the challenges or the root causes of the problem or opportunity are. But there are also others, and I would really encourage people to work with assumptions carefully and rigorously. Lastly is risks. The Impact Investing Handbook actually does a lovely job here of unpacking different types of risks, because in the investment world, working with risks and considering risks is such a focus. So I would refer you to the handbook here, and again, just encourage you to be systematic in working through the different types of risks. The better the risks are articulated, the more targeted and effective the risk strategies can be. Many of them can be mitigated as soon as they are properly surfaced. Because one is trying to make an impact, a social or environmental impact, there are risks that are not related at all to financial risk or the return on investment, but on the actual effectiveness of the intervention. So this is a really valuable framework for unpacking that. And there's an example in the handbook of how you then take the next step of addressing or mitigating the risk. There are more tips and advice and examples and good practices in the Impact Investing Handbook, including a good sheet with typical pitfalls or problems with theories of change. There's also some good case studies on the Crutham website where also you can see them in context of impact investment, where theories of change are being used. And I will also add some additional slides to this deck. A while ago, I conducted a survey among SAMIA members of the South African M&E Association, and they gave some really rich inputs on how to do theories of change well and some of the challenges they've encountered and how to learn from that. So I hope that assists. And then just to touch on, what do you now do? Once you've got a good theory of change, and it actually accurately speaks to your investment objectives and so on, what do you then do? You now need to develop an IMM framework and select metrics. So moving briefly on to that second step. And I just have one slide in which I will touch on this briefly. In the IMM world, we speak about 5 dimensions of impact. And all 5 of them, once you've designed your IMM framework and selected your metrics, you should be able to answer questions about what, who, how much, contribution, and risk. And these are all explained nicely if you Google them online on one of the sources that the Impact Investing Handbook also draws on. Because the metrics need to be able to not only tell you about one of these, but about all of them in order to inform decisions comprehensively that can feed into the management of the investment strategy. I said we would return to the example that we showed earlier, but let me then, I think for the sake of time, just briefly say, looking back at your theory of change, you should consider which metrics are appropriate for each result on your results chain and across the levels as well. There may also be things outside of your theory of change that are warranted to be measuring or monitoring because they are so critical. For instance, external forces that may tell you more about external risk, if that is something you've highlighted in your risk framework as being critical. And lastly, before I hand over to Jerusha, there are different ways of analyzing that data once you've got it. Statistical approaches, experimental, case-based, and theory-based are all briefly explained in the handbook. And I would make a particular pitch for at least including some case-based measurement approaches in your IMM framework and IMM strategy, because development practitioners generally are becoming increasingly aware of the complexity of development in general and of the types of change we're trying to make. And case-based approaches give you that insight in a way that some of the other approaches may gloss over or just not be able to pick up from the real people and dynamics on the ground. So I'll hand over at this point to Jerusha to talk a bit about more innovative and advanced things.
Thanks, Karia. So moving on to how you might enhance your theory of change. So what Karia has shared is, if you look at this cartoon, is a lot of what you're doing within this box. And it is really a critical step. I think having clear structure, having a process where we've documented the logic is useful as a starting point in developing developing your impact measurement and management practice. But I think more and more what we see is that in certain contexts, it may not be enough. Or like in this diagram, as you see, once you step out of the room into the real world, there are so many other factors that are influencing if A and B happen. And sometimes within our theory of change, it's not clearly articulated how those externalities are influencing or what we should be measuring on that. And so enhancing your theory of change is really us sharing a few examples of what are other things to be thinking about as you develop your theory of change or as you want to enhance or mature what that theory of change looks like. And the three key innovations that we are sharing is firstly, looking at a complexity-aware approach, which is system mapping, which is basically, it's as I'll demonstrate in a moment, is a method that allows you to look at a theory of change, but also look beyond that in a context where intervention is highly complex. Well, the intervention is complex, but the context in which it's implemented is also complex. Second is looking at indigenous or African-rooted approaches, which are also emerging as a critical method to integrate in your measurement practice. And then lastly, tech-enabled tools which can support the implementation or your design of your theory of change. If we look at systems maps, so systems map also are often visual diagrams. In this case, which I'll zoom in a moment, it demonstrates that really a system map is this visual depiction that should be representing different components of a complex system. And it also shows you how they are connected or interacted. So very similar to a theory of change in itself. However, if we look at this example, often you'll have a systems map that has multiple aspects to it. So it looks at, in this farming case, the farming system, the economic system, the social system, and the environment. And your theory of change might focus here. So if I had an intervention that was supporting farmers in accessing specific seeds or resources to increase production, I might measure what are those inputs, what's the ultimate outcome and impact of that farming initiative. However, we know that in fact, this initiative here in farming is affected by the biological system. So there are other aspects around the nutrients of the soil, biodiversity that influence it. There are economic related factors. There's the health system that affects the individuals that are supporting affecting the biological system, but also maybe the individuals that are affected by the farming system as well. So systems mapping really looks at, okay, in context where I measured, like what I'm measuring, actually, it's showing me we're not achieving certain things. We've provided the seeds, we've provided the capacity support, but we are not seeing increase in agricultural output. Often it's things that are within other systems. So this is just a quick example of what that might look like and a methodology that you can actually do it kind of concurrently with theory of change. So it allows you to develop a theory of change, but also look at, okay, from an assumptions perspective, if we had to flesh out the system, what else should we be thinking about? The example B zooms into a systems map that Karia and team had actually recently developed for Western Cape Department of Agriculture. So this just gives you a more clear picture of what that might look at if I had to zoom into a specific node. So in the system that they were looking at, water access was a key element that would affect agricultural success or output. But we can see that there are multiple other things that either negatively or positively affect. So population growth, which are likely, these are not part of the intervention, but they are key to keep track of because they will influence the outcomes of the intervention. So that's system mapping. We do have, there's a QR code and a link at the bottom of the slides. If you want to have a look, we've got a resource kit where you can explore this a bit more. And yeah, there's a couple of examples there. Secondly, another way of enhancing your theory of change is looking at how you integrate indigenous or African-rooted approaches to developing a theory of change. And so indigenous evaluation, African-rooted evaluation is really like a growing field within evaluation or subfield. And what it refers to is really that the way you design your theory of change should be culturally relevant, community driven. And this may be through additional methods that have a particular focus on how you engage communities, but also how your measurement is based on what communities deem as relevant knowledge and feel are aligned to their values and their perspectives. So for example, we might count the number of individuals that are trained in that farming initiative, but in a community, they might refer to how they have been able to support the communities as a key outcome. And so then we need to think about actually what is the measurement for that inter-community support as opposed to just the increase in output. The two examples I share, so first example A is from an initiative in Australia, and this is specifically for Aboriginal communities, and they also share ways of doing almost an iterative development of theory of change, where there's listening, sense checking, harvesting insights, and then co-creating this theory of change. So it's really informed by the community. In addition to that, there's a visual element, so that your theory of change in these boxes make clear sense for an MNE or IMM person, but how do we make sure that it still makes sense for communities, and that we are also ensuring that we're empowering communities to engage with the theory of change or own that theory of change and shift power in that way. And I think it also links to God has pointed out having a case-based approach. In some cases that is relevant. And so we must understand measurement based on a community or a different unit than an individual or specific output. So the visual is, this is a diagram, like a visual depiction of theory of change, where it obviously is in a very Aboriginal relevant design. And each element refers to, or the flows between Western and First Nations refers to like flows of information. These kind of U shapes refer to individuals convening and groups coming together. So in this case, it becomes a theory of change tool that is visualized in a different way for communities. And then very briefly, an emerging approach coming from the Pan-African Indigenous Evaluation Consortium, we are part of this consortium. They have developed a tool called Pamoja Safarini, and it's currently under development, but this is a sneak peek into what this tool is about. It really is also based on Indigenous evaluation kind of principles, and it looks at how do we rethink in an African context our approach to developing a theory of change. And within it, there are a set of principles. So it really provides additional guidelines to how you would engage a community to understand what are their views of what success looks like if we introduced seeds and capacity building. What do they perceive it as? How do we ensure that we also consider maybe perhaps not only a single logical step, but there are intertwining steps, because communities might perceive it not as a single logical step. How do we visualize that? But also how do we then facilitate that conversation with community? And then the last is tech-enabled kind of application, or these are more approaches to support your theory of change. And there are various tech tools that are either assisting with the facilitation, the capturing of the insight, how you interact with your theory of change, or how you collect that data that you plan to measure in line with your theory of change. So at the bottom, I've put the logos of a couple of tools that some of them may be familiar. So Miro, Mural are great whiteboard tools for virtual. And these are useful in context where you're developing a theory of change where the intervention is, maybe it's regional across multiple provinces and your contributors are in multiple locations. There are tools like Kumu, which is great for that systems mapping exercise I mentioned, but even for theory of change where you want to interact with it and look at, actually, I only want to focus on this results chain, or I want to zoom into the meaning of the first step. And then you've got various online kind of monitoring platforms like Logalto and Dev Results. I find these a bit pricey, and they are like US-based platforms, but they are helpful in having kind of documenting, this is the theory of change, these are the indicators or things I want to measure and be able to track it. At the top is just a quick sneak peek to a platform that PDG, in collaboration with our software developer partner, had created actually with Krutham, for the Jobs Boost program. So it also gives you an idea of how could I then take my theory of change and apply that to something I measure and can actually use practically. And what we are showing you is the theory of change was a different step. It was created, and they then used that to inform a set of indicators. Those indicators then became what you would track. So they were tracking cohorts, job seekers, employers, but also concurrently, there's also that kind of verification and kind of compliance steps that were critical. So ensuring that payment requests were aligned with targets or achievements. And if a payment request was, in this case, was requested, what are the supporting documents and what's the verification process? So this gives you an example of how you could use technology to support kind of the next step once you've gone from theory of change to what I measure to actually measuring. And there's a case study as well, which you can explore to see how it was developed and how it was linked to specific measurement. So that brings us to the end of the presentation, sharing just an introduction to IMM, theory of change, and also the additional kind of innovations that you can be thinking about. Yeah, here are our emails in case you have specific questions. I know there'll be Q&A, but we are open to you reaching out to us if you want some additional info. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jerusha and Karen. I think a really good foundation, right, into impact measurement and monitoring. And I think really useful to sort of get this lens of needing to be able to zoom in and zoom out as appropriate, and to make sure that you're clear on what you're measuring, when you're measuring it, and why. And I think that's really the core of it, really is about making sure that you're measuring the right things at the right time for the right purpose. So, and thank you. I think if you're comfortable for us to share this slide deck with everyone afterwards, there's so many great sort of case studies and examples and frameworks in there. I think one of the things that I would always say to the people on this call and to foundations that are looking at developing the impact investing strategies is that there's no shortage of resources to support you in this journey. And you're also very rarely unlikely to be the first one who's ever done it. So I think it's great to learn from your peers, which is another reason why we have case studies as part of these webinars. And I'm really excited to hand over to Beatrice to talk to us a little bit from the Anglo-American Foundation's perspective around their approach to how they've been taking these principles and applying them in practice. So Beatrice, I'll hand over to you to sort of talk us through your approach and whether or not what you've heard today resonates with you.
Thanks so much. And it was fantastic to hear again from Karen, Jerusha. It's always good to remind about theories of change, and sometimes we get lost in the practicalities, and it's so nice to just go back to all the principles again. So I really appreciated it. Thank you. So today, as Nicole's mentioned, I'm just going to talk about our approach to impact management and management, coming from a very practical and ever-learning point of view. So really, in the foundation, I just wanted to start off with just talking about some key principles in the foundation. Around our IMM, sorry. So firstly, obviously, we want to drive impact. We seek to deliver programmatic impact in Anglo-American's countries of operation. So at the moment, that means South Africa, Peru, Chile, and Brazil. And next year is sort of ramping up in Brazil, really. But I'd say, most heavily in South Africa and Peru, with Chile having started this year. And in the foundation, we've also got what we call our methods of change. So how we carry out our work in the sector is vital. Our methods of change are our roadmap to get us to the change we want to see. So this is on a very practical example, but it's just really co-designing for impact with partners is a vital part of this, and I'll touch on that in the next slide. We seek contribution, not attribution. So while we want to catalyze through guidance and resources and connections, we recognize that partner outcomes are ultimately their achievements. So, whoever we are funding or investing into. It's the achievements of the partners, and it's shaped by their expertise and leadership. And I think this is a very, big thing for us, especially, in Anglo American, to sort of, with our board of trustees around really sort of driving this message home. We learn by doing, and I think this is really important. I don't understand anything generally from a theoretical point of view, so I really have to do everything. And we test our hypotheses, our assumptions, and we most importantly learning. And the one thing around our board of trustees is that we're not afraid to make mistakes, and there's always been that culture of learning. If you get it wrong, well, you know what to do better next time. And I think that really just helps the way that we do our IMM. And then obviously we strive to share thought leadership with the sector. We continually share our evidence and learnings for greater impact. So just really touching on our IMM framework, I've got a very simplistic one here, but it's across four quadrants. So, and you'll see there's the sort of ever revolving arrows and the learning and the learning and the learning, which is literally all I do is just learn and feedback where I can. So the first one is the planning of the impact, which is what Jerusha and Cara talked about today. Spending the time doing the root causes, the theory of change, the assumptions, the outcomes, the systemic change we're trying to seek, the methods of change, which I talked about, the co-designing of indicators. So across our portfolio of investments, we have standardized indicators. And I think it's really important to emphasize this co-designing. So the work that I have done with Crutham in our impact investing has been months and months of co-designing, back and forth, and bringing in partners, testing it against the businesses that we potentially will be funding. It's so that they know what to answer. Is this stupid? Does this make sense? And it's been a lot of fun, but it takes a very long time. And the same goes for the learning questions. So as I say, we are a learning foundation, but it is about, what do we want to learn? What are we not afraid to get wrong? And then how will we collect the data? That's always, is it a pie in the sky, or can we actually do this? And then moving to the right, the collecting evidence. So after the baselining, I've got what we call the traditional M&E methodology, which is really the reporting back on the theory of change in 6 month increments, and feedback sort of around our methods of change. So I call that AAF feedback. So that's seeking feedback from our partners, from Anglo American, as to how we're doing, really, just in the way that we are doing our work. Harnessing evolving artificial intelligence. This has been a massive focus of what we've done in over the past 2 years. And it's been around empirically verifying our data in real time, understanding obviously that anecdotal is still still vital, but it is around the verification that's a huge part of the work we do. And we are moving towards a real-time data management system. And I gave a talk to a pastor earlier this year around AI, and it very much been piloting, seeing what's possible, seeing what we can do. And then obviously the independent evaluations come into the collecting evidence. This is the chance to take a step back and independently, have someone else say, what are you doing in these projects, and is it any good? It's a chance for us to get out of the weeds. And then there's just the ongoing gathering the country and sectoral trends and insights. This is what we need to do as Anglo American. Are we keeping up to date across our countries, and are we able to add any can we bring stuff that we're learning in one country across to the other? So it's a constant evolving learning system. And then there's the analyzing the evidence. So on a 6-monthly basis, all our collected data is analyzed and mapped against our learning questions and collated into a progress and learning report. So this is where we're trying to answer the so what. And this is where we give as honest as possible, going back to the not being afraid to make mistakes, honest progress and learning reports that we share with the team. I think, we're very honest amongst the team about how things are going. And then it's about the bringing that to the board of trustees as well, to show them what we're doing. And it's vital for celebrating our early wins. And then there's the course and the theory of change correcting. So as we've heard, theory of change is an ever evolving thing. It just is, it's constantly evolving, and we've always got to be updating it and changing. And then there's formally documenting our work. I know Justin from Crutham used a nice word the other day, which I've stolen, which is collateral for the philanthropic sector. So it's documenting our work, our process, our impact, our learnings, and sharing it across the sector. And I'm actually embarrassed to share this theory of change because it's so basic considering what we've done. But we have done the back work into this. But this is a very, it's very simplistic, high level of what the Anglo-American Foundation does. And it's sort of we champion youth for a green and fair future. Our methods of change that I've spoken to are along the bottom, which is amplify, convene, knowledge share, and co-design, which I've already spoken to. We have a place-based approach across our countries in two buckets: youth empowerment and economic opportunities. And our impact investing sits squarely in the economic opportunities around innovative financing. And, as I say, it's a place-based approach. Then we've got the partner outcomes from our programs. And then we've got the foundation, our work, our methods of change program. And then blithely at the top, I've put systemic change, which I will speak to. But this is still very much a work in progress. And I think, I've been in this job for over 2 years now. And, I think just sort of evidence in terms of how, just in a practical level, everything's back and forth all the time. So it's been a really slow process. We've had the luxury of Anglo-American giving us the time to figure out what we needed to do, but to even build into sort of those two buckets of youth empowerment and economic opportunities, it took us sort of 18 months of sandbox grants. As I've mentioned at the beginning, it's about the learning on the ground, the doing, to figure out what works. And what we're realizing in these place-based approach across our countries is that in some areas you need to be doing more youth empowerment, and in some you need to be doing more economic opportunities. We can't say equally across all our place-based areas that we're doing equal of everything. So really, just to go a little bit into the outcomes, and Nicole, just shout if I'm running out of time. These are the outcomes that we sort of are seeking with regards to our partners in our areas of interest. So it's around increased knowledge, increased capability of organizations, jobs sustained, jobs created, MSME customers, progress of MSMEs through the pipeline, social connections formed, improved capacity to deal with emotions, increased contribution and volunteering in community initiatives. And then as we're moving into the longer term, it's increased survival rate of MSMEs, pay and safety becomes very important for us, greater political involvement in these areas of interest, strengthen ecosystems, behavior change across the thematic areas, and changing government legislations. And then just underneath, it's around our methods of change outcomes that we're seeking. So we want to see an increase in number of programs that meet the co-design criteria. We want to see an increase of number of programs that meet the locally led criteria. We want to see an increase in number of formally documented collateral. We want to see an increase in new co-investors, official strategic partners into our programs. That's part of the catalytic work we want to do. We want increased co-investment. We want to see findings from research and insight and strategic recommendations being put into our programs so that we are learning from the sector and we're putting it into our programs. And increasing the number of sort of occasions that we're knowledge sharing with the sector. So really just to, I put it very much still in development, which is around the systems change work. And Jerusha was talking about Miro board. This is sort of my stabs at attempt. I've got a huge Miro board that I sort of keep going back to. It's around sort of the systemic change that we're doing. So what is the system? And you'll see if you look very closely, we're looking about youth agency in Johannesburg, but this can apply to any of the areas across any of the themes. And we're just trying to document what are the systems we're wanting to change. And that is a ever-evolving conversation, as I've mentioned. Some of the things we are looking at is, increased youth agency in our places of investment, greater volume of social capital at a regional and national level, enhanced mental well-being at country level, and replicating our model into other areas. So that's just to sort of show the work we're doing parallel to everything. So parallel to our, day-to-day M&E, this is something that we're also doing on the side. And then it's, the ultimate thing. So this is sort of ultimately to say, as a foundation, how can we really show that we've shifted systems? And this is where we are going, into the world of rubrics, which is sort of, a well-known technique actually from education, criterion standards. But so it's really pulling back and saying that while traditional results frameworks can design and, we can track our indicators, our standardized indicators, which, essentially keep the Board of Trustees knowing where we're going. But we want to understand the really complex systemic change that we're trying to achieve. So the benefit of rubrics and why we are starting to delve into this world is that it's not defined by, you don't define success by one indicator going from here to the, 0 to 100. It's a continuum. So you can actually show the progress. So especially in a system, you're not going to see change in the short term. So, but along a continuum, you can start seeing how you're doing. So it's a progress towards this change. And it recognizes this massively complex and, the constraints in which we're working. So again, it's going back to the co-designing, the criteria and standards, and creating a shared success, language with our partners about what success looks like. And when I say partners, is also, what does success look like for the Anglo-American Foundation and Anglo-American in their countries? So as I say, at the bottom, we're starting to develop a rubric for each of the systems changes we're seeking. And, again, this is my last slide, but it's really just around, well, what are the what type of rubrics could we measure? Youth self-belief, youth participation, youth inclusivity, pro-youth policies, availability of work pathways, types of work pathways, employment opportunities, fair working conditions, inclusive business practices, trust in our areas, mental well-being, and adoption, scale up, and replication. And we're certainly not going to have a rubric for each of those. I think for us, it would be, a win would be three rubrics that we can measure our progress as a foundation in the long term. So that is a very, very speedy view of the work that we're doing in the foundation.
Thanks very much, Richard. And I think it's so great to hear Anglo Foundation's approach as an iterative one. I do think that that's something that needs to come through quite strongly, and I think hopefully it does in the handbook, is this idea that anyone who claims to have their impact measurements sorted out and done and is sort of sitting back with their feet on the desk has missed something major.
Definitely
so
not.
You've got to be flexible and acknowledge that realities change, context changes, and you've got to be really on your toes. And I think that's where this idea of why are we measuring comes in. So we're not collecting data for data's sake, right? We're collecting it because we want to improve, because we want to maximize our impact, which is the whole reason we're considering an impact investing approach at all, right? Is because we want to maximize our impact. And so understanding that that is a journey is really important. going to hand over to you now, Lwazi, to talk to us a little bit about what you guys have been doing. I know you've been doing some exciting things. I will share your deck, and then will you just tell me when you want me to change slides?
right.
Let me just find it quickly. There we go. Okie dokes. Put it in slideshow for you. Alrighty. I am ready when you are.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Nicole. Colleagues, yeah, from my understanding of the brief, or rather my tackling of this talk, of course, Jerusha and Kara did a great job with regards to the technicalities, and Beatrice shared, where they are from an IMM perspective. And from Makwande's perspective, I'm going to firstly just tell you a little bit about who's this Makwande, because wherever I go, I get asked now, who on earth is this? So I'll speak a little bit about Makwande, then I'll speak a little bit about where we were and where we are now. So mine is more of a story and a journey than a technical presentation. Yeah, let's go to the next one, Nicole. So Makwande is the old Distel Development Trust. So before 2023, there was no Makwande Empowerment Trust because Distel and Heineken had not yet merged. So Distel didn't have a traditional BE partner in the traditional sense of the word. So Distel Development Trust was Distel's BE partner. So we're a broad-based ownership scheme and not a not a CSI type foundation or SAD type of foundation. So Distel, we were Distel's BE partner. We used to, our shareholding was 15% of Distel South Africa. When the two companies merged in 2023, Heineken also persuaded to continue with that strategy. So they also don't have a traditional BE partner. The Makwande Empowerment Trust is their broad-based ownership scheme, and that's their partner from a BE perspective. I think what's important from that regard is that, of course, we get verified from a triple BE perspective. And initially, the Distel Development Trust was initially more concerned about meeting BE verification strategies, or I don't want to use the word ticking the box, but more being compliant, really, so that you don't get trapped by the BE Commission. But part of this journey is how we've transitioned from just being more compliant to actually seeking to bring about meaningful change, and of course, taking our beneficiary partners with us. Also, the name change from Distel Development Trust to Makwande was because Distel, there was never an alcoholic brand called Distel. But if you are now going to Heineken Beverages, there is a brand called Heineken. And both the trust and the negotiating party from Amsterdam were not keen on having the foundation or the trust being called Heineken Trust. So we went on a journey where we invested. We used to have about 11 or 12 partners, beneficiary partners. We did a workshop and we simply asked them the question, what does this trust mean to you? And at the end of the workshop, they named the trust Makwande Empowerment Trust, which really means just a blessing, abundance, shared prosperity. It's a Nguni word, both Xhosa and Zulu, which speaks to multiplication. If we are to be simplistic, it says, let there be growth. So ordinarily, if someone blesses you with something, you would say back to them, Makwande, may they continue to be growth and prosperity from whatever was the source of your giving. So as I said, at Distel, we were 15% shareholder. At Heineken Beverages, we were 9%. Our trust deed ensures that we have a bias towards women, if I can use that term. So we're supposed to be 51% women. We are currently sitting at 73. And those are just some stats for the calendar year 2024, which has been verified independently. We can go to the next one, Nicole. Yeah, and this just gives you a brief outlook of where we are geographically. So in 2018, we were basically in the Western Cape and a little bit in the Eastern Cape. As things stood as November of 2024, again, I'm just using the ones that are already verified. We have a presence in Limpopo, Mpumalanga, Gauteng, KZN, Free State, and the Northern Cape. I think also with the merger between Heineken and Distell, from a resource perspective, we were meant to be better resourced than we were in the Distell days. So when we used to attend the meetings or sessions that Crutham normally facilitates, you know, when in a session with Standard Bank and SAB Foundation, I used to argue that they would have come to that meeting with Porsches and we would have come with a bicycle. So we're a relatively small organization, and with this merger, at least I think we are now on a scooter or a motorbike compared to our colleagues. But this is our presence. This also enabled us to increase the team. So from 2014, when the trust was formed, to 2023, there were always just 2 members of staff and 7 trustees. From the end of 2023, we increased to 4. So in the earlier slides that you saw, you would have seen 4 people, and myself and 3 ladies. That's basically the team. Next slide, Nicole. Sorry, man, when I was practicing this, I ran out of time. That's why I'm trying to rush so that I can catch up the time. Again, if we look at 2024, where we've been, I think when I speak a little bit about a theory of change, you'll see why we use these particular sort of markers with regards to what has happened last year. But last year we were involved in education initiatives that benefited that number of children. We were involved in skills training, vocation skills training. We helped establish some businesses. We call income generation. In other words, we don't only start measuring when the activity becomes registered as a PTY, but once someone starts trading, we already start to look at that. So a combination of our income generation and businesses started with 213, and the number of jobs created in 2024 was that. And as I said, these ones have been verified. And then we have this it's really a systems approach around rural development, and there we try and measure the value of the produce that is being produced. I think it's also important before we move to say that our impact statement is really around holistically empowering, and that word holistic is put there purposefully. We really aim to holistically empower Black youth, women, and communities. This is, of course, because we are a broad-based ownership scheme, hence the focus on Black. The geography is rural and peri-urban communities, and really those that were affected by the legacy of poverty and inequality. And when we were going through our sort of SRI journey, we first looked at I'll get to that slide. We looked at, what was the context and the history of an organization such as ours. And so that informed, how our impact statement would formalize. I think Jerusha and a colleague put that in proper context. But I'm just trying to say it was important for us as an organization to understand what was the problem that we're trying to solve for, and then work backwards from there. Let's go to the next one, Nicole. I wasn't sure whether to put this slide in or not, but I thought it's important to put it because, again, these values, we decided upon them after, again, understanding what is the impact that we're trying to have, what type of organization we'll be. And so the values became important. So if you look at the bottom right, it says emancipation. And really, I know that's not normal corporate language, but luckily we're a trust. But really what we seek to do is to say, how can we help people towards self-determination and emancipate them from inequality and poverty? So we're very focused around, creating systems where we will ensure that people are emancipated. And so deep impact comes with regards to that and care. We are courageous. And for us being courageous, a simple example is that we will go where others don't want to go. So I don't know how many times I've been stuck in the mud because I went to villages and places that are not sexy to go to, and sometimes get stuck. But yeah, I thought our values, again, they speak to our story and our journey of where we were just being worried about compliance, but actually saying we actually want to positively change the lives of people. And so we understand the problem that we're wanting to solve. And so even these values are intertwined into that message. Let's go to the next one, Nicole. So I guess if we are to speak about our journey, I won't spend long on these 2 slides, but if we were to speak about our journey, and as I said, our colleagues, Kara and Jerusha, would have said this, these technicalities more better. But in 2019, I joined the trust in 2018, late in 2018, and in 2019, I basically said to my board, I wanted to understand, and I use that word impact. I wanted to understand the impact of what had happened since the trust was formed in 2014, started distributing money in 2017. And at that point, then got introduced to this impact measurement journey and language. And all I'm trying to show you is that when in 2018, 2019, the trust was really worried about activities, it was really about how much money did you give? Was it meant to build classrooms? Did it build them? And how many children attended, right? So we're rudimental, for lack of a better term. And we're really around level 1 or level 2. And our beneficiary partners were really seen more as fulfilling needs than actually strategic implementing partners taking us towards a goal. So I wanted to show this slide to say around 2018, 2019, we were level 1 towards level 2. Let's go to the next one, Nicole. And but then in 2019, we were introduced really, and as I said, Kara and Jerusha spoke to this at length. We introduced to this methodology where then we started to shift. We started shifting really to more about understanding a theory of change, what it is that we're trying to solve, but also then being able to put ratios of benefits with regard to the money that had been sent. Let's move to the next one, Nicole. So as I said, in 2018, 2019, our mindset was really focused on outputs and activity numbers. So that's what we were reporting. And our founder organization was great. So they were like, okay, you trained 4,000 kids, that's great. What happened to those kids was not really known, or it wasn't. And as I've said, our engagement was really more on a needs basis rather than strategically aligned outcomes and impact. And really, we provided funding that had limited framework of measuring long-term sustainable change and creative. And so I believe that the trust had always been effective, but we were doing work, but we couldn't demonstrate really what was the lasting value and the social change that we were contributing to. We can move to the next one, folks. In 2019, so when I had that, when I had this thing of, it was really like thinking like an auditor, where are we so that we can determine where we're going. I spoke to our founder partner at the time, Distel, and they introduced us to these guys called Forethought. And they really, after the first session, I wanted to chase them out and say, how can you, they basically just said, Roz, the way in which you've been doing it is really just compliance. Let's move you. So there was some inner turmoil, which first caused the transformation to take place within ourselves as the leadership and then our trustees. And then we really moved to saying, let's transition to being more impact focused, and that's why our purpose changed. It was really guided by a theory of change. I think I spoke to this a little bit on the earlier on. So what we also did is then we transitioned how we viewed our partners to being more beneficiary partners. From turmoil to transformation. How we then, how we work with our beneficiary partners. We even started calling them, so in our strategy documents, we call them strategic implementing partners, because really that's how we see them, and so part of this collaborative effort was to say, once the trust understood its own theory of change, how can we capacitate our partners so that they would also understand the theory of change and that there would be alignment, and then we would move together. So one of the key learnings from that exercise was that actually, the social return investment methodology is a powerful tool for understanding what impact we create, how we create it, and for who, and not just the punishment tool. So when we started rolling out to our organizations, I've run out of time. But when we started rolling out to our organizations, we also found similar resistance. And then once we said, guys, this is not a punishment tool, it's really to help us equip so that we can have sustainable impact in outcomes. The second insight was that it helped us define, our desired outcomes, how they were aligned to our investments, even the decision-making changed, and basically, and how we shared our vision with our partners. So so back before 2018, even our application form. So we don't really have a call for proposals. We basically understand what it is that we're trying to achieve, and then we go out and find implementing partners. So before that, we had an application form which was just the BE stuff. But after that, we actually started saying, guys, we need you to understand what impact you're looking at, what are the outcomes, what are the outputs activities. So even in that form, we already start sort of contracting with regards to saying what it is that you are seeking to achieve, how are you going to achieve it, and so that we work towards that. So even in our site visits and even in our reports, it's really tracking what we had agreed upon when we started. Let's go to the next one, Nicole. Sorry, man, the time has left me. So this slide just speaks to the fact that we sought to understand our problem statement, not just the effects, but to understand the root causes. So the reason we speak about holistic is because we understand, we seek to understand what are the root causes of each problem, so that we try and solve at root causes and not just effects. Let's go to the next one, Nicole. So even before the 2019, we understood our historical context. We understood what we were dealing with. We saw the effects, but we're not really strategic about how we create this into a theory of change. So from the 2019, 2020, we assisted with that process. Let's move to the next one, Nicole. And so in that 2019, 2020, as I said, remember, we're a small organization. We were a bicycle. So my budget was small. I only took 6 programs out of the 12 and I capacitated them. And at the end of that process, did a proper social return on investment results. And these are just some of the partners. And the trustees on my board, who are CAs and actuaries, love this slide. For them, we could have closed the book at this stage because they wanted to see, from a rent value, what had happened. But more importantly was how our strategic implementing partners got to understand what it is that they were solving for, and what steps they could use. But also, because we love collaboration, some of the funders, they could use the same info to speak to other funders and really be able to prove what is the social return on sorry, man, I keep reading these pop-ups. What's the social return on investment? Let's move to the next one, Nicole. I think whilst we are talking about that, I mean, we see ourselves, of course, as investors, but our return on investment really for us is more on the social side than on the return side. I'll just take some of the examples. So when Tanda had finished their theory of change, these are some of the activities that they were doing from the funding that we were giving. Some of the outcomes, I've already spoken to the social return investment. But once they understood, this whole journey, they became more focused on actually measuring the impact, and not just. So in the past, they would tell us the number of veg, the rand value of veg produced. But post this process, they were telling us what is happening. In other words, there's a rural economy that is developing. They started seeing that actually, even from an education outcomes, they've got another program which is funded by someone else around education, but they were seeing outcomes there. And they've now started a program where they're seeking to increase this organic farming so that they can strengthen the rural economy even more. Let's move to the next one. So that speaks a little bit about rate. Let's move to the next one because of time. So Ubunye, also they sought to increase the number of enterprises, micro enterprises, but also diversified, because they understood the impact and know that it wasn't longer now just about numbers. They were saying what types of enterprises would work in our context, and what other interventions could we do to make sure that our women are not only empowered from having rands and cents, but that holistically they're able to know how to manage that money and so on and so forth. I'm doing a disservice here, Nicole. Let's move to the next one. So from a trust perspective, as I've said, we really sought to reimagine our purpose. This whole process for us helped us to understand our impact objectives, to understand our approach, that it was depth rather than breadth, to have very specific impact outcomes. But also, I don't like the word focus areas. So whether you call them strategic pillars and so on and so forth, but they had to be underpinned by the fact that for us to be able to solve the problems we're seeking to, we need to be holistic, we need to understand local context, we need to be sustainable, and we need to be empowering. And so for us, those education, health, and so on and so forth are really just tools that we use depending on, you know, the impact that we're trying to reach for that particular geography. Let's move to the next one, Nicole. I think I'm almost done. Yeah, so currently on this journey, so what happened was in 2020, COVID hit, and then the bicycle became walking on 2 feet. So budgets became an issue, and we couldn't continue with that process. And now our coffers have sort of started recovering again. So we are now doing because we did Tanda in 2020, we are now doing a longer term analysis with them. We are bringing on new partners that we couldn't do a proper social return investment in 2020. And there are new partners that we've onboarded in 2024, and we're already getting them ready on this journey for social return investment. The next one, Nicole. This was very heartwarming. So in the current cohort that we're doing, we received a letter from one of the directors of our partners saying, yeah, they are thankful so much for such an informative, stirring, and engaging, eye-opening process, which is really helping them understand what is the problem that they're trying to solve. It's a Maths and Science Academy up in Limpopo, but actually what they're trying to do, or the chief of that area is saying, I want to improve the quality of lives of the people of this area, of these 16 villages. So Maths and Science is really just a tool that is being used in changing, in positively impacting the lives of the people in that village. So this process helped them understand, actually, in fact, they came out with a different impact statement after undergoing this training. And next one, Nicole.
Jose, I'm going to give you 1 more minute so that there's still time for questions.
I think I'm closing. So I think why this matters for us is that I think we became a better, more intentional organization where we clearly understand the change that we want to see. This process for us wasn't only for us, but it enriched our beneficiary partners, giving a better framework and understanding and being able to articulate their own impact. And really, we transitioned from just being funders to really being strategic partners in social change. And we have the view that this approach will continue to drive meaningful and sustainable, scalable impact. I think the last one is just to say thank you, Nicole. Ne?
Yeah, it is. Well done.
Sorry, guys. Sorry, man.
No, thank you, Jose. I mean, it's great. And I think fantastic to hear about your journey and how it's not just about measuring your impact, but about helping your partners to understand theirs and sort of go for that holistic change. So, I mean, that's a really great example. And I thank you also as well to Beatrice and to Jerusha and Cara. I do feel like there's been a lot that's come through. I see there are some questions in the chats. So let's see. Here we go. So there's one question around what systems people are using for their impact measurement. And then there's another on, oh gosh, there's a couple. So the one is around how does one practically balance the needs or requirements of the foundation investment theory of change and the IMM requirements of the partners that we're investing in. Yeah, and I think there's a sort of note here about overburdening your partners with all these expectations around the data collection. So I'm not sure if anyone's, Beatrice, you're nodding vigorously, so I'm going to hand that one to you, and then we'll talk about systems people are using after that.
Thanks, Nicole. And I'm nodding because you know, I have been on the other side. You know, I did work for an NPO a long time ago, and I do know how awful it is. The one thing that we have tried to do as the foundation. So I mentioned that we you know, we require reports biannually, but that's purely on numbers. In terms of the longer feedback, the qualitative, that's once a year. And actually what I do is we do check-ins and I type as people talk. I see it's my responsibility to do that. I don't think it's theirs. And I think what they tell me in the check-ins is far more valuable. So I just basically have a Word document that just has every check-in with every partner. And then when it's very messy, but I go back to it and I take the notes from across the year, just to, you know, and I really understand that burdening. So, yeah.
Awesome. Does anyone want to talk to the system? So, Lwazi, you talked about social return on investment. Is there anything, a specific system or that you're using?
Yeah, firstly, just to add to Beatrice, some of the questions, like the one project in PE, I said to them, I want to know how much are the kids earning 5 years after they've left the college, right? So if you're going to ask such a question, you must put money towards the resource, So from our perspective, we're like, if we are really partners and you saying to me, this is the need, because it's not a master-slave relationship, it's really a partnership. And so it included investing some money so that we can have a better depth and understanding of what happens to the students a year after completing 5 years and so on and so forth. Sorry for taking longer. And then Justin, with that one of SROI of R1 versus R2. So from us, because I was rushing in my presentation, I forgot to say from us, from the onset, we said this is not a punishment thing. So if the scores are unfavorable, for lack of a better term, it doesn't mean we're going to exit. That is the first thing we needed to do so that we could give people comfort and that we can have robust and proper engagements. And so what we did really was to walk a path and really see how we could better improve the results where possible. Again, understanding the context for us, the context of where that organization is, it makes a big factor. Sorry, I don't know if I've answered you.
No,
But
that's great.
it's on its own, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that you can't improve or maximize your impact if you don't understand where you're starting. And that's the first step is putting in place mechanisms, like Rosie says, to just understand where we're starting. And from there, you can then make strategic decisions informed by your values and your mission to maximize that. And it's not, like you say, it's not a punishment to ask someone to help understand what it is that they're actually delivering. So doing that in a collaborative way, and I think I liked what Beatrice was saying about co-creating the process and the metrics and saying what makes sense for you to be measuring and reporting on, and making sure that we actually are measuring the right things at the right time for the right reasons. It's really important. I don't see any other questions in the chat. I'm not sure if anyone wanted to, and I suppose the last minute or two before I hand over to Louise, if anyone had any questions they wanted to maybe ask verbally. Seems like I think we're okay. Well, yeah, we really hope that you found that insightful. I know I learned a lot. I hope you did too, and I hope that you're feeling empowered to start thinking more deliberately about impact measurement and management. My job now is very easy just to thank all the speakers for their time and sharing their insights, and to hand over to Louise for closing. Thanks, Louise.
Thank you, Nicole. And thank you to all the speakers and presenters. It's great to get such rich presentations to help us in the practical applications, also to help us better understand this. And a big thank you to the Crutham team for this webinar, as well as the previous two for the whole series. Been really valuable to our IPASA membership. And then just lastly, to thank the SAB Foundation, who has made the series possible. So I don't think anybody's in the room here from SAB, but thank you to them. And we have put in the chat the link to register in the program for our Impact Investing for Foundations Masterclass on the 27th of October in Stellenbosch. There are a few more places left. So if you're still interested, please do register, or if you want some more information about it, please pop an email to us at IPASA. But we're hoping you can really join us for that and really take a even deeper dive and a much more practical way, obviously because it's face-to-face, to be able to understand this. So, but thanks all again for today, and thank you to all our members who joined us. Oh, sorry, I see SAB Foundation. Sorry, the SAB Foundation is here. Thank you for your, I couldn't see there's so many people on the screen. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Sure. Louise, your video worked at the end, eh?
I went out and I went in again, and and then it came on. So not sure what it was. I don't know. Technology does always confuse me. Anyway, thank you, Lwazi, for your
Thanks,
presentation.
Lwazi. Thanks, Louise.
And
Thanks.
thanks,
Thanks,
Justin.
Pia. Thank you, Candice.
Bye-bye.
Have a good afternoon,
Thanks.
everyone. Okay, cheers. Bye-bye. Bye.